Thank you, everybody. It's good to be back with the AbleNet University group and this number 7 of our 10-part series on the quality indicators for assistive technology and the ways that they apply to kids with disabilities and assistive technology services. Our topic for today is the topic of assistive technology and transitions. My name is Gayl Bowser. I'm an independent consultant in the area of assistive technology, and I work all over the United States as a consultant, often to state-level programs and state and regional level programs. I want to hand the mic to my friend Diana Carl, who is also with me today for this transition webinar.
Welcome, everybody. We're glad to have you with us today. I was previously a special education director at Region 4 Education Service Center in Houston, Texas, and was lead of the Texas Assistive Technology Network for the state for 12 years. And currently, I'm an independent consultant, as Gayl is, and I work as the Special Projects Coordinator for the National Center on Accessible Instructional Materials. And I believe Gayl will move us to the next slide to talk about that.
Yeah, many of you have probably been a part of the AbleNet University webinar series already, but a couple things we wanted you to know. You can make your screen bigger by clicking on the maximize button or the link in the upper right-hand corner. It works better if you aren't running several applications at the same time because it takes up some bandwidth. If you're hearing an echo, you might be logged in twice, so please close out one of your connections and try again. You can tell that because you'll see your name twice on the list of participants. If you're having audio cut in and out, one good thing to do is to mute your audio, wait a little bit, and then turn it back on. So try those things, and you can also send messages to Gloria Olson, who is monitoring the webinar today, and use the chat box to do that. When you have a question for Diana or I, we'd like for you to move over to the next tab on the right and use the questions box. But if you forget to do that, we've got a way to make sure that we see your questions as well.
Well, as we begin to talk about the transition indicators, first I want to set a little bit of framework about all the QIAT indicators, and you can see that transition is the 6th indicator. And we're going to set a little bit of background about why we went about doing these indicators to begin with. And the purpose of QIAT is to guide the provision of AT services to improve educational participation and results for students. We also wanted to ensure the quality of services and to increase consistency of services is why we started this thing in the first place. Gayl and I are both members of the leadership team for QIAT. And there are some basic assumptions about all of the indicators in the QIAT series, and let me lay a little groundwork about that, because as we talk about each of the indicators, we're not going to go back and say every time that they're legally correct, because that is one of the basic assumptions, that they're legally correct, that they follow the state and federal mandates, and also we try to align them as much as possible with district policies. Of course, that varies from district to district. Another thing is that all of the work in the QIAT series requires multidisciplinary team members, and those team members we assume include the family and caregivers. So we're not going to say the IEP team and family every time. That's a basic assumption. Another basic assumption is that we have a lot of different professional backgrounds of people that participate and work in the area of assistive technology, and that they all follow the code of ethics for their specific professional background. So Gail's going to begin to talk to you about how we went about developing the indicators for transition.
You know, I don't think we've talked about it in previous webinars, but one of the ways we came up with the original list of indicators that were then validated by research was that we started with a conversation that looked a little bit like the bullet points on this slide. We talked about when things go wrong in a particular assistive technology service area, what does that look like? And that helped us in some ways to figure out what our definition of right was. Because when we started with the QIAT indicators, there really wasn't a definition of high-quality assistive technology services. And in fact, we were trying to develop one. So it seemed particularly useful for this webinar to talk about some of the common errors that are made in transition to get us ready to talk about the indicators themselves and the reasons that we developed the indicators. One of the things that we saw as we talked about assistive technology transition was that there was a real focus on planning for students rather than having them be involved as a part of their assistive technology team all along the way. But that becomes particularly important when they move to the adult service realm. There was also a lack of, in some instances, of adequate long-range planning on the part of the sending and the receiving agencies. We try to do things too late, like add an augmentative communication device when a student is 17 or 18 years old and only has a couple of years left in the public school setting. We saw teams that failed to communicate well or coordinate well, teams that failed to address funding responsibilities before the student left the school because they weren't aware that the devices students had in the school setting were going to stay in the school setting and not move on to adult services with the student. Some other common errors, we didn't have, in many cases we had failed to get adequate evaluation, documentation, data, things that the adult service folks needed in order to provide services to our students after they transitioned. And there's also often philosophical differences between the public school and the receiving agencies, many times based on the difference between whether the, as in IDEA, the service is mandated for students who need it, and the fact that for adult services, assistive technology services and all other services, are services that people are eligible for but have to apply for. So there's a difference there that affects our transitions. Also, there was a lack of understanding of what both IDEA and the adult services laws said, and we wanted not only team members but students to understand their rights and responsibilities. We've talked with you a little bit about us and the kinds of experiences that we've had, but here's a chance for you to do a poll. And I can see people are already in and doing it. Thank you for doing that. What you need to do is click on one of those round buttons and then say submit, and your results will show up in the poll. I can see on mine that we have about a quarter of the folks today, at least so far, it's trending that way, are assistive technology specialists. We have another large group of speech-language pathologists, teachers, OTPTs, administrators, and a large group of other. If we had a little more time today, I'd tease out who those others are, and I'm hoping that some of you in the other category are, oh no, we got parents and family members. Thank you for joining us. I think this topic, more than any of the other topics for our Quiet webinar series, is crucial to parents and caregivers. While we're here, though, doing the poll stuff, looks like we've got pretty much everybody in. Well, there's a few more people chiming in. But I'm going to move on to the next poll just for the sake of time. We'd also love to know what your familiarity is with the quiet indicators. So you can choose anything from, I'm not familiar with quiet at all, I have a basic awareness, that maybe means I came to a couple of these webinars. Everything from that to the final bullet point is I use it to measure changes in my work. So again, we're seeing, that's what we've experienced in these webinars, a pretty large group of people who have a basic awareness, another group who is new to the quiet indicators. So if this is the first time you've joined us for one of the webinars, welcome. And you'll get a feel for the area of transition today, but also I hope it gives you a feel for the indicators in general. Looks like we're slowing down on our responses. So I'm going to move to the next slide and give Diana a turn to talk.
Well, yes, and I want to also add to that, since we do have a lot of people that are not too familiar with QIAT, that later in the presentation we'll be talking about the QIAT website, which you see the address for at the bottom of the slide. And you can get all kinds of information there, and we'll be talking about that a little bit later. So I want to talk about the transition area in general. And it's, of course, about the ways that the students' use of AT devices and services are transferred from one setting to another. One of the things is that we need to address how that's going to be transferred from one setting to the other. We're going to be focusing mainly on secondary transitions to out of public school into the community or to to higher education. However, all the principles and everything we're going to be talking about work just the same as they're transferred from classroom to classroom or from building to building or whatever. They're all types of different transitions. And some of the things that we'll focus on are the self-advocacy, self-determination, and implementing the services in the new area. One of the things that we've learned over time is that without a focus on the planning for specific AT issues, that these transfers just don't happen naturally. So a student may have learned to use a device very well in a grade school classroom, and when they transfer to middle school or secondary school, it just doesn't happen. You really need specific planning in order for this to happen. And we have a lot of different people, and they need to work together in order to ensure the continuity, the self-determination, and the effective use in those new settings. Next, we're going to move to...
Diana, before you move, I see there's a question in the question box. Is this only for transitioning from public school to adulthood? Two of us are watching to transition from elementary to middle school. Go ahead.
That was what I was saying. We're going to focus on the what we sometimes call the big T, moving from public school to adult services. But all the principles that we're going to be talking about apply to the other transitions just as well. And we'll probably be giving some examples and things that you can see about what needs to happen early on. And one of our things that we talk about a lot is the long-term planning. And if that doesn't happen, then the big transition doesn't happen very well if we aren't planning for all the smaller transitions along the way. So Gayl is now, what we're going to do next is look at a video, and I've given you the web address for this. This is a young lady named Yada, who the AIM Center has done a series of videos on, and we're only going to see one of these videos. And she's quite a remarkable young lady, and you'll see that the work that was done throughout her school experience so that she would have an appropriate transition is quite remarkable. I'm going to give Gayl time. She has to go to her desktop in order to show us this clip, and then we'll talk more after.
Let me say, too, before we get started, hopefully by now you're seeing a screen of the video that we want to play. Sometimes when we do this on this particular ReadyTalk site, it works beautifully, and on occasion there's a little bit of delay in the sound. So we're hoping that you will be able to just bear with us if that happens to you.
Okay, Gayl, and let me tell them also that Una has a visual impairment, and that prevents her from reading standard print materials. And so she uses assistive technologies, Braille, and a lot of specialized formats in order to succeed academically, and you'll hear more about that.
This Una is a really high-functioning student. She's going on to college, and you'll hear more about that. I want to also mention that in a little while we'll show another video of a student with a much different kind of disability who has a different kind of future. We want to recognize that the quality indicators for assistive technology transitions apply to all kids who use assistive technology.
Point. Yeah, that's a great point, Gayl, because although Una is very high functioning, all the things that happened along the way in the planning for her to make these transitions is what is really important. It's the principles of what happened.
Okay, let's try this video thing, see how it works.
Okay. There may be a slight delay, as Gayl said.
Una reflects on how the role of her vision teacher and paraprofessional evolved over time, moving from offering direct instruction in the early years to acting more like a safety net during her high school years.
So when I was younger, my vision teacher would actually spend time teaching me how to use the note takers that I was about to use before I actually used them in class, which was, very helpful at the time, especially since, I was like under 10, so everybody kind of spoon-feeds you everything. And then as I got older, I think the role of your vision teacher becomes to introduce you to new technology and then have you figure out how to do it yourself instead of actually teaching you how to do it. That's what my most recent vision teacher has been doing. She'll tell me that this technology might be good for this, we should try it out, and if I like it, we use it. If I don't, we don't. And I'm the one who's in charge of trying to figure out how to use it. And of course, she's there if I have to ask a question, but I think it's still like an important step in your independence to be able to just be given something that you know will be helpful, but figure out how to use it yourself.
Una talks about what it's like to have a paraprofessional attend class with her, and the natural tension that develops as she increasingly pushes for her independence.
And then as far as a paraprofessional, I've had one, the same one since I was 6, and she used to be in all my classes, which I thought was really annoying because she's like the nicest person on the planet I've ever met in my life, but it's still kind of like having parent number 2 like in class with you. So I would ask for her not to have to come to class with me, so now she doesn't come to any of my classes with me. And again, I think that's like kind of establishing your sense of independence because nobody else has like a person with them all the time. But she definitely has helped me like when I was younger in classes.
Una's support team has been working on building her independence over time, so she's prepared to excel in college.
We've been pulling away those supports. Little by little, we've been doing it kind of invisibly to her. And we know she's ready. We know she can access the curriculum. We know she will be able to do well on her own.
Yuna's transition into Harvard is exciting for her because...
Definitely. I am looking forward to going to Harvard because they have the best 3 bubble tea places I've ever been to in my life around that area. Since I have been 11, I've been going to a conservatory on Saturdays, which is right next to Harvard Square. So I know Harvard Square, like, inside and out, and they have this gigantic Starbucks, and I'm a Starbucks addict. There's an anthropology and, like, the best food places. So that is what I'm most looking forward to. This is such a good area.
Yuna feels confident about navigating through the new challenges she may face during her freshman year.
I don't think I'm really anxious about, like, getting the materials in Braille or accessibly because I know that even if I don't get them in Braille, if I get them, like, in print, I'll still be able to use my magnifier. So before when I was younger, I didn't really have that fail-safe where, like, if something was in Braille, I never used a magnifier until age 12. So if it was in Braille, I couldn't do anything. So it's a lot, like, easier now that I know even if the teacher forgot last minute or something, I'll tell them, but at the time, I'll still be able to access it. And also Harvard has, like, one of the best disabilities programs in the world, so their accessible technology office is really, really good. So I'm not really anxious about that as much. What I'm most anxious about, freshman 15.
Throughout her life, technology, accessible materials, and supportive people at school and home have enabled Yuna to be fully participative in all aspects of her education and life.
I think that definitely the tools I have enabled me to move on to, like, bigger and better things, I guess. Because, like, I just remember, you know, being younger and having to hold the book up close to my face, and my eyes would always be straining, so they'd always be really bad. And I could read a lot slower than the other kids because I had to physically move the book from side to side, like pan along, because my field of vision was so small. I think that having those technologies, like, puts you on an equal playing field with everybody else, and that you actually have a way of accessing everything else that everybody else has.
And it'll take Gayl a second to bring us back. And as I was saying, this video shows a whole lot of different things that we'll be talking about as we talk about the transition indicators. And I would encourage you to go to the website at the AIM Center and look at the whole series. And Gayl's going to move us on into the first indicator.
So, whoops, and the second. I think Diana and I both clicked at the same time. That's the one danger of doing things together. If you've been a part of the AbleNet series before, you will remember that for each of the areas in the quality indicators that we've spoken about and will continue to work with in this series, there are just a few statements, somewhere between 5 and 7 statements, that describe what high-quality services look like. I want to make sure that everybody's aware that for this series of webinars, we're not talking specifically about the technology or even technology solutions, but we're talking about what good services look like so that we can build on them and make sure that the technology is included. So the first indicator is transition plans address the assistive technology needs of the student, including the roles and training needs of the team members and the steps that need to be taken to make sure the transition happens. One of the things that we see that's probably better illustrated in the intent statement is that sometimes teams that are planning transitions for kids, whether they're from preschool to elementary school or from grade to grade or from high school to community services, often those teams neglect to address the assistive technology needs of the student at all. So a good transition plan assists the team that's going to be new to the student in helping to know what the needed supports are and help them to assign responsibilities. Again, if you're familiar with the quality indicators, each of the areas also includes a self-evaluation matrix. Here's the picture of the self-evaluation matrix for this indicator 1 about transition plans that address AT needs. And you can see that on the chart on the number 1 side, you see the least promising example, which is that transition plans don't address AT needs at all. I always like to move, you have this available to you from the QIAT website, so I always like to move to the middle area just to demonstrate the scope and sequence of these matrices. So the middle one, number 3, is transition plans sometimes address AT needs but may not include who's going to do what or what steps need to be followed. And then the number 5 indicator, the most promising one, transition plans should consistently address AT needs, and the team members who are involved should know what their roles are and what the next steps are to follow. This is probably a good time to talk about a couple handouts that we provided. And both of these handouts come from the QIAT website at QIAT.org. Here you see the URL on the screen. In the resource section, there are 2 different documents that we'll be referring to a couple times today, and that you should have been sent when you got your handouts for today. The first one is a transition planning worksheet, and we pulled that one up specifically right now because we are talking about this indicator number 1 that's about making a transition plan. This is actually a 4-page document that lists a number of the things that a team might be considering and the kinds of skills that they might be wanting to include in the instructional program or the coordinated set of activities for a student who is in transition. We'll show you a couple specific parts of the transition planning worksheet later as we move on through the indicators, but I wanted you to know that this is a really good, pretty quick document that would help you identify some things you might need to do to make a transition for a student who uses AT more smooth, and also assign roles and dates. And I think if you look at this worksheet, you'll see many of the things that Una mentioned in her video exemplified here in this transition planning worksheet. The other handout that I want to refer you to is the guiding document for transition. This is an expansion of the indicators themselves and also an expansion of our discussion today about the quality indicators for transition and the kinds of steps that teams might want to take. There are also in this guiding document and the one for each of the QIAT areas many examples and questions that the IEP team might want to ask. So these are both 2 really good resources. We'll talk to you about some other resources later on in the webinar, but these are ones that you should be able to refer to if you're interested in this topic of assistive technology and transition. Let's go on to the second indicator. And Diana, I think it's your turn.
Oh, it is me. I got my place mixed up. I'm sorry. Okay. Okay, transition planning empowers the student to use AT to participate in the transition planning at a level appropriate to age and ability. And this is really just critical. You want the student to become a causal agent in their own life and their own future. And the intent statement talks about the specific self-determination skills that need to be taught to enable the student to gradually assume responsibility for participation and leadership in the transition planning. And the transition AT tools are provided as needed to support the students' participation. It's really critical. It was one of the common errors that we looked at, that the planning takes place over time, and that as you noticed that when you watch the video about and how she took over her own self-determination as time went on. That we have a matrix that was developed in each one of the transition areas. Did I just
went backwards. Let me move you.
Yeah. Yeah. Would you move forward?
Well done.
Sorry.
There we go.
We talk about the matrix that was developed for each of the transition areas, that moves from the least promising to the most promising. And we noticed when several of you indicated that you were using QIAT to help do some planning, long-term planning, as well as to look at where the services might be in your area and where you might need improvement planning. This is one of the tools that you can use to do that type of planning. As I said, it moves from least promising, that the student is not present at the meetings at all and included in the planning, all the way over to 5, which is most promising, which the student's a full participant and input is consistently reflected in the transition plan. So you can also go to the QIAT website and download all the matrices and all the different indicators. So, Gayl, would you like to proceed to the next slide, please?
Okay. The next indicator is about advocacy. It sort of refers back to the previous one, but the focus of this indicator is really advocacy and self-advocacy to the greatest extent that the student is capable of advocating for themselves. What we know about all of our students who leave our setting and move on to a new setting is that if they are, unless they advocate for their own assistive technology use or have people around them who can advocate for that assistive technology use, there's a much more strong likelihood that the technology will be abandoned. And many of you probably see that as when you send kids on to a new setting or send your students on to adult services, that some of the work you've done that was really, really hard work to make assistive technology useful and functional for your students either gets abandoned, or people in the new setting may even start all over with work that you might even have done because they aren't aware of what's going on, and there's nobody to really advocate and tell them that, how things have worked in the past and what really is functional for a student. Una, as you saw in the video, is very much able to advocate for herself. In a moment, we're going to meet another student who has a different kind of disability and isn't as able to advocate for himself. So in that case, you'll see that his mom is really his advocate. The intent of this indicator is that everybody involved in the transition ideally advocates for the student's progress, including the student's use of AT. And I think in the transition area, more than any other area, it's important to talk about the reasons that we use AT. And the reasons that we are so focused on assistive technology for our students is because we want them to be more independent and, as Diana said, more active participants in their own life. I love that phrase. If you're not an active participant in your own life, then you're sort of following somebody else's script. So this indicator really focuses on what self-advocacy looks like and the kinds of things that need to be addressed. Here's the matrix. And again, you'll see the least promising is that there's no focus on advocacy for the AT use, that the sending environment during a transition just sends it on and wonders why they didn't read the reports and do what we did last year. And the most promising, there's advocacy both by individuals around the student, the people who are their supporters, and also the student themselves. I'm going to try another video here. This is Jared, and as I switch screens and share my desktop again, I want to tell you that the video we're going to see next is from the Family Center on Technology and Disability. If you're not aware of their videos, I really want to encourage you to take a look. They've been doing a whole lot of assistive technology in action videos that showcase different students, different kinds of students with different levels of disability. And they're really useful for me in getting a picture of what it might look like if it's really well done, so that it's a good match to the quality indicators. It's also a wonderful tool for sharing with people that you want to provide information about assistive technology and how kids use it to make it real. So let's take a look at Jared and see what he's like.
Hi, I'm Charlotte, and I'm Jared's mom. Jared is an amazing young man. He has a great sense of humor. He loves spending time on the computer and interacting with people around the world and also us as a family at home. Jared was born with cerebral palsy, and it affects him physically, but mentally and intellectually he's very smart. Jared uses a sip and puff to access his computer. The sip and puff sends a signal to Jared's environmental control unit on his wheelchair, which sends a signal to the task switch, which sends a signal to the IntelliKey switch. The IntelliSwitch sends a wireless signal to Jared's computer that controls a software program called SwitchXS. SwitchXS allows Jared to do anything on his computer by choosing options from a pop-up menu that scans through several choices. When he gets to the option he wants, he then uses his sip and puff to make the selection. He can type, control the mouse, and do anything on his computer.
Okay, so that's Jared, and you can see he's, again, a much different kind of student who needed a great deal more advocacy because of the complicated nature of his disability and also because of the complicated nature of his technology. This is not stuff that Jared is going to be able to physically manage independently, and so he needs more help and more advocacy, but also Jared needs to have self-determination skills in order to get himself to the place that you saw in the video. You can imagine that he had to be a pretty active participant in his own life in order to make some of the choices about the technology he would use and how he does his job every day, but also make some big lifetime decisions about how he was going, where he was going to live, the kind of work he wanted to do, whether he wanted to be out in the community or doing some other kind of work. So he's chosen to work at home as a web designer. And in order to do those jobs and have those skills, have those abilities that he's created for himself and his family has helped him create, he also had to have problem-setting skills, goal-setting skills, be able to evaluate his own performance and manage his own performance, like his own schedule and stuff like that. And also to have some self-advocacy and leadership skills for his own life. If you're interested in this topic of self-determination, Michael Waymeyer has written a number of different publications about self-determination, some even that are specific to assistive technology, and I would recommend that you look at this area. When we've done some research on transition and assistive technology, this often seems to be the missing piece, that if students aren't self-advocates, have self-determination skills, and often have advocates for their long-term use of assistive technology, we're likely to see more technology abandonment. So I think that's an important piece of information to have. I get to talk about the next indicator too. So that is that AT requirements in the receiving environment are identified during the transition planning process. The intent of that is just to make sure that somebody looks at the new environment, the new tasks that will need to be done, make sure that the supports are there to do the tasks that need to be done, and that it's done as a group effort so that people who have good information about the students are able to share that, but also people in the new environment are able to share their new tasks and new concerns. Here's the matrix again. The least promising thing, which you will also recognize as one of our common errors, is that AT requirements in the receiving environment are not addressed, all the way up to the kind of planning that you saw for Una, which, she already knows where she's going to get her coffee and her bubble tea. I loved that part of the transition, because that social aspect of any kind of transition is really important. Kendra says, can you please say the name of where that video came from? And then Louise asked the same question. This series of videos that includes Jared comes from the Family Center on Technology and Disability, and I believe if I go back to that slide, oh no, I meant to put the URL on there. I'm sorry I did not, but if you go to fctd.org, Family Center on Technology and Disability, you should be able to see that one. And if you don't, go ahead and send me any. Yeah.
Do you recall it changed to that other agency, 360? What was it? Do you
okay.
recall?
I think what we better do is send you the URL.
Yeah.
We'll make sure that Sharon gets it, and Gloria gets it, and get it out to you so she can send it to everybody.
That's the best idea. Yeah.
Okay. So let's go into indicator 5, Diana.
Okay. This indicator is about planning for students using the AT, that it proceeds according to an individualized timeline. And the intent is that it's adjusted based on the needs of the students, the differences in the environments, the differences in the tasks as they come about and are required. and that these timelines are well-mapped action steps with specific dates and ongoing opportunities for reassessment. We find that flexibility is really important, that you have to be able to reassess and adjust. One of the things about these timelines is that IDEA requires that we start transition planning at age 16, at least by age 16. However, many states have state timelines that are earlier than that, and the important thing for us to remember is that we need to consider what's needed for each individual. I would assume that for Jared that he needed planning, and his timeline started much before age 16. And as you saw with Una, it started long ago, early on in early long-term planning to build her self-sufficiency and independence. Some of the things that are really important to document is that the dates are well documented, and as I said, that they're flexible, that they're reviewed and adjusted. In this action planning, it's good to identify who has the responsibilities to do what, and be sure that you're working according to your district guidelines, and that if you're including this IEP planning the transition planning in your IEP, that you proceed in a way that is aligned with your district guidelines, so that everybody knows where you're going to put it and how it's going to be written, and that everybody can find it when they, particularly when the student moves from one setting to the other. It's very important that these things are well documented. I will move to, I hope I will do it correctly this time. Moving to the matrix, that the either we're moving from the least promising, that the timelines are not developed, all the way over to the most promising, where they're consistently developed and they support the transition planning for the student choosing AT. So the matrices are used as a way of marking how you're proceeding, and usually the changes are somewhat gradual from one area to the next, but if you keep using these matrices over time, you can measure how well your district is doing, your team is doing, your campus is doing, whatever, in movement toward reaching the most promising practices. As you saw with Una, there was a lot of planning that was done based individually on her as an example. So we will move on to Gayl, and she's going to look at the last transition indicator. I won't double click since Gayl left
okay.
too fast.
But one of the things you all should know is that I am in Portland, Oregon, and Diana, I assume, is in Houston, Texas, but she could be almost anywhere. It's one of the joys of doing... Are you in Houston?
Yes.
Okay. It's one of the joys of doing these webinars is that we can reach people all over the country and be all over the country ourselves. So it's quite a collaboration effort we've got going on here today. The last of the transition quality indicators is that transition plans address the specific equipment, training, and funding issues so that students have the technology they need and can use the technology they need in a new environment. We had quite a discussion about this indicator and what order these should be in, because really indicator number 6 is the thing that most often we think about when we talk about assistive technology transition. This is the kind of work exemplified in this indicator that is almost always done by teams that are helping to plan transitions for students who use assistive technology. Earlier we had a question about how to address issues when a student moves from one school to another, and the instructional technology people or the people who control the network aren't willing to, or have difficulty understanding why they should change their network protocols and things like that in order to make it possible for a student to use their AT. That kind of issue is exemplified in this indicator, as well as where does the funding come from, and other questions like that. But we actually put it last because we wanted, while it's very important, we wanted to sort of emphasize the other indicators a little bit more. This one makes for an immediate smooth transition. If we've done really good planning in this area, we've talked about equipment and hardware and software, and it shows up in working condition, and the manuals are all there. Provisions for maintenance and technical support are included. Then things will go well in the first, I'm just going to venture a guess, couple weeks. But what we know is that without focus on the other indicator areas, things may fall apart rather rapidly, and that's when we begin to see technology abandonment. Here's the range of matrix possibilities, the self-evaluation matrix for this indicator, and I really appreciated what Diana said about the fact that I've never met a team that rated themselves a 5 on every single indicator in every area. But this is a sort of a way to grade your performance and begin to figure out what steps you need to take to improve your assistive technology services. Nobody's got perfect services. And even if you had perfect services today, something would change and they would need tweaking again tomorrow. So this is the matrix for that indicator area. But let's go back to that transition planning worksheet that we talked about earlier. This is the kind of, indicator 6 talks about the kinds of things that you see here listed on the transition planning worksheet. So this is a portion of the worksheet that I showed you early on, and it was one of your handouts. So there's things about device-specific things and tasks and general transition tasks to be completed. What I want to recommend is that you take a look at this transition planning worksheet, because it really will walk you through most of the indicators. I see that Laura has asked a question here. Where would we find district AT guidelines for AT implementation? There was a webinar recently that's archived in the AbleNet University webinar series about assistive technology implementation. So I would refer you to that first. But just as we talked about today, resource documents and guiding documents for assistive technology transition, you could also go to the QIAT website to download some other documents and guidance about assistive technology implementation. And I want to invite anyone to have a dialogue with us after the webinar about any of these topics that aren't quite directly related to the transition planning that we're talking about today. I think there are lots of implementation resources, but maybe not ones.
And Gayl, I'd like to add to that. It really depends on what you were talking about, or guidance is to help with that. But it depends on the district if they have developed their own specific guidelines. And usually they have more to do with how they're going to go about the IEP process, and they include different areas in what they're going to include in the documentation. And one of the questions was, do you find resistance from the districts to make this available to parents for review? And I would say my answer to that would be it depends. Because sometimes those are more working documents within the district, but I would just go to your district and ask them about it.
Okay. I put up a poll here, and I see some of you are on it. You've been looking at the screen. The question that we have here for our final poll is, which transition indicators will you address? These 6 boxes are a shortened list of the indicators that we've talked about today, and I think what we're asking is, what struck you as you were listening to today's webinar about what needs to be addressed in your situation? Because as Diana just said, we have lots and lots of different things to address and lots of different ways of doing things around the country. I can see that many of you, almost half of you, are saying that the indicator that you think you might need to address most first is this first one about transition plans address AT needs. You may do that in a variety of different ways, and we have lots and lots of ideas about how to do that. Both Diana and I have worked in the area of transition for assistive technology users for some time now, and we think it's a really important topic because all of the work that we do in preschool and grade school and middle school and high school that involves assistive technology is really leading up to that transition of students from school to community, where they need to be as independent as possible and have the advocacy and self-advocacy they need. So looks like almost 50% of you are talking about addressing that first indicator to maybe better address the assistive technology needs of your students as they make transitions.
But also what's interesting, Gayl, is that there's strong support for each one of the indicators.
There is, and I'm betting many of you just clicked on every single one, because the numbers over here that I see add up to way more than the number of people on the call.
Okay. I'm going to click on the next slide because we're about to run out of time, and I want to quickly mention this is a image of the QIAT website, and this is where you can go to sign up for the QIAT list. If you see down on the bottom right-hand side, you can click on the QIAT list. Many of you said you weren't that familiar with QIAT, and this is a listserv that serves about 3,000 people. And you'll be amazed at the amount of information that's provided on this listserv. We've recently been working on the website to make it more accessible, and I think you'll find many pieces of information. As you see the tabs across the top, I'm going to click next so that we go to the resources. And you see under that tab are the things that we have talked about today, where you can go and get things out of the guiding documents for each indicator, etc. There's also a resource bank where people on the list contribute papers that other people would like to see, and it's a way of sharing them. Another resource that we'd like to highlight is that there is an AT transition module on the Okali site, which is okali.org. You go to the next slide will show you more specifically where you go there. If you get into their assistive technology internet modules and go over down to the AT problem solving across the lifespan, there's a red arrow on the AT transition. This is a module that includes a lot of the things that we've been talking about that Gayl and I were authors of to put up here. It's also something that can be used for self-study, as well as it can be used for professional development. It has discussion questions and frequently asked questions and answers. It's a rich resource for further study. And I want Gayl to please take it away with the things that we've learned today and the things that we want you to take back with you.
Hopefully what you've heard today is that just because students use assistive technology well in their current setting, there's no guarantee that they will continue to use their assistive technology well in new settings. The coordinated set of activities that the transition team plans should include a focus on AT use, and there's specific things that teams can do and help students to learn to ensure that continuity of assistive technology use. I think the indicators make a great list of those things. So those are our big ideas for today, hopefully things that you took away from this webinar. Our next webinar is about professional development for assistive technology. It'll be on April 16th at 11:30 Central Time, and Scott Marfelius and Kathy Locke will be your presenters for that webinar. So we hope you join us again.